This is the Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. On today's show, Stephen Miller, America's Cancer, Donald Trump, and have you heard of this guy? I hope I'm pronouncing Jeffrey Epstein? Epstein? Anyway, have you heard of this guy? I'm going to talk about him a little on today's show. Florida. Let's get to Florida, though. Florida Republican Congressman Corey Mills is still under investigation by Washington, D.C. police for domestic disturbance involving a female visitor who wasn't his wife. And he is now reportedly facing even more legal troubles. Now there's a divorce. And this week we learned his landlord reportedly filed an $85,000 lawsuit against the congressman / defense contractor for back rent. A Republican lawmaker who just voted to slash Medicaid and food stamps can't pay his rent. As a defense contractor, Corey Mills often brags to colleagues in the House that it's his tear gas being used on Black Lives Matter and anti-ICE protesters. I could sure use some of that tear gas right now because it's the only way my eyes are ever welling up for this turd. Well, the big story in Washington, of course, Joe Biden used an auto pen. And we need to get to the bottom of this, at least if you watch Fox News. As president, Joe Biden relied on the same machine all presidents use to sign documents, and that proves a secret cabal of George Soros surrogates controlled the entirety of Joe Biden's presidency while he remained incapacitated. Jill Biden was Edith Wilson. So, Gaza, Ukraine, flash floods, income inequality, and gun deaths, all pale compared to how monumental Biden's auto pen scandal is going to turn out to be. Why? Because when someone invents a time machine and sends this entire country back to 4 years ago, then all of us will be living under a totalitarian socialist regime controlled by George Soros's dark state, deep and dark, which refuses to release the Epstein files. We need to get to the bottom of who really ran the Biden administration, because you never know when this entire country will get sent back to the year 2021 instead of what's happening right now, which is our entire country getting sent back to the year 1821. Some of you might be unfortunate enough to remember Kentucky Congressman James Comer, who, as chairman of the House Oversight Committee during the last 2 years of Joe Biden's presidency, spent millions of taxpayer dollars investigating Hunter and the make-believe international Biden crime family. Seriously, that's what this hump, James Comer, claimed. And now he's been tasked by the Republican attack machine with turning the auto pen scandal into a major distraction from the cruelties inside one big, beautiful bill. In launching his investigation into Joe Biden's auto pen, committee chair James Comer said, quote, "No one uses an auto pen for legal documents. I can't use an auto pen to sign subpoenas. That's my legal document. Subpoenas. I have to fly back to Washington, D.C. just to sign one piece of paper." He's a liar. Turns out Comer used an auto pen to sign all the subpoenas for his probe into Biden's use of an auto pen. Take a look. That is committee chair James Comer's auto pen signature on a subpoena demanding testimony on Biden's use of an auto pen. I mean, could it be that this man is completely full of Trump? Next thing you know, Comer's college sweetheart is going to come forward claiming he beat her after giving their real names at the abortion clinic. Oh, wait, that's already happened. We've talked about that. But the fact that Joe Biden used an auto pen, that Donald Trump used an auto pen, that Comer used an auto pen, that won't keep Republicans from insisting that incapacitated President Joe Biden ran an international crime syndicate. Comer said that, literally, he claimed that during the last 2 years of the Biden administration, Joe Biden, incapacitated, was running an international crime syndicate. Comer was attempting, while Biden was president, to make a full-throated case for Joe's impeachment, but he couldn't impeach. Couldn't do it. Republicans had the majority in the House. They could have impeached Biden, but they couldn't, and they wouldn't do it because this was never about actually removing Biden from office. It was about distracting the American people from the fact that Republicans controlled the House of Representatives but couldn't pass a single piece of legislation that helped ordinary Americans. House Republicans use their committees to demean the White House when a Democrat is in office. And when that Democrat leaves office and they have nobody to blame but themselves, they still blame Joe and Hunter Biden. Instead of working to tackle the housing crisis, income inequality, or corporate America's price gouging, Republicans still hold out hope to their rancid voters that Joe Biden, now being treated for bone cancer, will be exposed. So what if the number one cause of bankruptcy in America is medical debt and the number one killer of children is guns? The Republican Party's number one priority? Destroying Joe and Hunter Biden. Because what else are Republicans going to do with their power? Improve the lives of constituents? Where's the joy in that? And for some reason, MAGA Republicans, as their lives crumble, they still take the bait. They still rather see Joe Biden go down as an ex-president than be able to pay their mortgage, their auto loan, or their rent. They take the bait. They take it. Kind of like the Epstein scandal, and I'm taking the bait. I still entertain the notion that this time we finally got Donald Trump. We got him. We got him on the Epstein files. But then I take my meds and ask, do I honestly think for 1 second the Epstein files will sink Donald Trump? He's already spinning the chain of custody story that the Biden administration had the Epstein files for 4 years and they stuck phony stuff in there. So whatever you think might be incriminating, well, that's all manufactured. Nevertheless, this will go on and on. We'll hear about the Epstein files on and on while our civil liberties disappear and the 2028 presidential election remains in doubt. Think about this. The next presidential election is 3 years away. Do you think Trump's going to ride off into the sunset? He'll be in his early 80s. Maybe his chronic venous insufficiency will remind him to slow down and realize that the love of his life, Melania, never wanted him to run for president again. She kept begging Donald to retire so the two of them could live out their golden years sitting at Mar-a-Lago smelling Donald's McRib farts. That's all she ever wanted. Nothing is going to, he has nothing else. He's running again. And the Epstein files are not going to hurt him. But you know what I think could destroy Trump? And I'm just spitballing here. But what if a woman stepped forward claiming Trump sexually assaulted her? And then what if she sued Trump and a jury came back after examining all the evidence and decided, yes, Donald Trump sexually assaulted that woman and he needed to pay her, I don't know, $85 million in damages? I mean, a story like that would destroy Trump, because all these women who say they were sexually assaulted by Trump, some women even say he attacked them when they were girls. If only we had one rock solid jury verdict that stated under no uncertain terms that Donald Trump is guilty of rape in common law parlance, then the entire country would realize who this man really is. Certainly his evangelical disciples would jump ship if such a hypothetical jury verdict were ever to materialize. If only someone like, I don't know, E. Jean Carroll would finally step up, put her money where her mouth is, and sue Donald Trump for sexually assaulting her. The point I'm making is Trump's supporters, the entire Republican Party, decided E. Jean Carroll, who won such a verdict last year, they all decided that E. Jean Carroll and all those other women are liars, that they're all part of a massive conspiracy to destroy Donald Trump. So, if Donald Trump can get away with rape in common law parlance, if he can incite an insurrection attempting to overthrow a presidential election and still find himself back inside the Oval Office, what do you think is going to be in the Epstein files that's a bridge too far for his Republican supporters? Sex with Rosie O'Donnell? What could possibly be in there that would appall his supporters? This country always had its share of heavily armed, boneheaded racists, homophobes, and misogynists cloaked in flag and Bible. Self-destructive unforgivables who couldn't care less about their neighbors or themselves. Free trade, climate change, and affordable housing bores them, even though their lives literally depend on all of that. But they just want a leader who will punish people for both being different and owning things that they feel is their birthright. These people, our nation's most repulsive individuals, now have their hands on the levers of power. They are in leadership positions, which means they can brainwash low-information voters. I hate to break it to you, of which there are many in this country. People who don't know right from wrong now serve as role models, shaping impressionable minds, convincing them intolerance and contempt for our most vulnerable is a cherished Judeo-Christian value. In case you're wondering, it's not. What we have here in America is a leadership crisis. A civilized society relies on leaders to remind all of us that our number one purpose is to care for each other. That competition isn't about defeating someone, it's about being the best version of yourself. We need leaders teaching that, not just to our children, but to the parents of our children. People need to be reminded of this every day because life gets hard and we forget this. Which brings me to America's cancer, Stephen Miller. In what universe should this homunculus be in a leadership position. Stephen Miller is now the Deputy White House Chief of Staff. You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone worse than Stephen Miller. In the first Trump administration, he devised the family separation policy, and according to one report, Stephen Miller wanted to know why the Navy couldn't open fire on a boat filled with migrants heading to America. He is the reason ICE right now is rounding up 3,000 immigrants a day with no criminal record whatsoever. So look at this man, Stephen Miller. No matter how much he spends on designer suits, Stephen Miller still looks like the post-mortem photograph of every Nazi hanged after the Nuremberg trials. Everybody says he looks like a Nazi because he is. There is a clip circulating of Stephen Miller as a 17-year-old high school student. Stephen Miller, 17 years old, entertaining his buddies on the bus. Splash News found it. The conclusion, most people who've seen this clip, the conclusion they draw is that Miller has always been an evil bastard. I disagree. I'm going to play the clip. I see genius and squandered opportunity. Stephen Miller, and when you watch this video, you'll see he needed to be rescued from himself. I have had 17-year-old sons. I have been a 17-year-old son. I know how funny teenage boys are when they say horrible things and then justify these hideous statements using twisted logic. It's funny. That's what humor is. So this was recorded in 2003, right after George W. Bush launched his illegal invasion of Iraq. Supposedly, Stephen Miller grew up in a liberal Southern California blue state family. By the time this video was shot, 2003, Miller was already calling into right-wing radio shows and espousing anti-immigrant talking points. He was, at the time, a precocious crypto-Nazi. Crypto-Nazi, not a Nazi like he is now. He was a crypto-Nazi back then. In this clip, you see both the genius and the disease, an unflinching facility with words and logic. There is a comedic gift that could have been channeled properly with the right parenting, with the right schooling, the right surroundings, and medical care. Stephen Miller obviously needed psychiatric treatment. When you watch this clip, there's no question Stephen Miller is tragically gifted, and his mind should have been rewired before it embraced the dark side. Nobody civilized Stephen Miller. I don't know who to blame. Maybe it was the school, his parents, his surroundings, but somebody needed to fix his skull. Because with just a few tweaks, Stephen Miller could have been saved. Now he's a lost cause, a Nazi. It's sad, not for him, but for America. I know this boy that you're about to see. I know this 17-year-old boy you're about to see. I've had sons. I've been this kid. It didn't have to end this way. So here's the clip. Listen to the laughs Stephen Miller's getting. Remember, the only reason Stephen Miller's friends are laughing is because it's wrong. What he's saying is wrong, and Miller knows it's wrong. That's why he's saying it.
But as for Saddam Hussein and his henchmen, I think the ideal solution would be to cut off their fingers. I don't think it's necessary to kill them entirely. We're not a barbaric people. We respect life. Therefore, torture is the way to go. Because torture people can live. Torture is a celebration of life and human dignity. We need to remember that as we enter these very dark and dangerous times in the next century. And I only hope that many of my peers and people who will be leading this country will appreciate the value and respect that torture shows towards other cultures.
Torture is a celebration of life and human dignity. That is comedy. That is funny. A 17-year-old talking that way? That is brilliant. Miller is incredibly gifted, so it should come as no surprise that he was accepted into Duke, a prestigious university where he immediately fell in with white supremacist and noted anti-Semite Richard Spencer and young, impressionable Stephen Miller, who obviously enjoys the spotlight. He found that he could stand out in high school and at Duke by being a hateful bigot. Miller was raised in a Jewish family, and yet he immediately gravitated to Richard Spencer, a self-identified anti-Semite. You don't need a degree in psychiatry to hear Stephen Miller's desperate cry for help. Alas, it went unanswered. Unanswered by his parents, his teachers, his doctors, his friends. Think about this. Now, you have an incredibly precocious 17-year-old son. Maybe he's 18, 17 when he goes off to Duke. Already he's espousing hateful, borderline psychotic ideas about immigrants. And then he immediately falls in with a group of anti-Semites, Richard Spencer, white nationalists. What does a normal parent do? You pull that kid out of Duke and bring him home. If you had the wherewithal to get your kid into Duke, then you also had the wherewithal to get that kid the mental health treatment he so desperately needed. Stephen Miller's life was and remains a nonstop panic attack. Miller self-medicates through racism by getting a rise out of people, which is incredibly intoxicating. That's how it starts. You say racist things, try to put some logic behind it. People get outraged. It's intoxicating, especially if you're an involuntary celibate, which Stephen Miller clearly was. And despite being married, I'm certain he remains. Stephen Miller kept embracing the dark side because that's where he found the nourishment of both attention and stimulation. Again, Miller was raised in a Southern California ghetto of privilege, where his only option was growing up to be either a successful, liberal member of the managerial class or a total failure, a disappointment, and an outcast. That was his choice. He had two choices growing up where he did. He was under a lot of pressure. But starting in high school and then at Duke, he discovered a different path. He could embrace his mental illness, and instead of being funny with it, he could become part of the far-right, xenophobic, racist managerial class heavily funded by oil companies who secretly give money to race scientists in order to distract from the climate scientists. When you look at who's paying the bills for these racist think tanks, it's the fossil fuel industry. So yeah, that video of Stephen Miller makes me a little sad because I see myself, I see my sons and their friends in that video. I see every 17-year-old boy way too sharp for his own good, in desperate need of parenting, guidance, and a much healthier environment than he was being raised in. I also see a 17-year-old boy who was way too young to go 3,000 miles away from home to attend Duke. Too young. I'm going to assume he was 17 or 18 when he went off to college, where he literally fell in with Nazis. Had he turned to drugs, his parents would have brought him home. He turned to something even more intoxicating and just as dangerous, Nazis. And now he is one. He was a child. When you're 17, 18, you're still a child. Your frontal lobe hasn't developed fully enough for you to recognize what is dangerous and what isn't. You have to wait till you're 25 before you realize what you're doing or what you're saying is dangerous. That's a fact. These boys who go, especially boys, they go off to college, they think they're men. They're not. Children are shaped not just by parents. Our destiny is not just shaped by biology, it's also shaped by our surroundings. He should not have been at Duke. He should not have been at the high school he went to. The minute you see your kid saying xenophobic, racist things, you get him fixed, especially if you have the wherewithal to send your kid to Duke. Stephen Miller grew up in privilege. So yes, I blame Stephen Miller's parents for America's cancer, their son. I know his uncle has disavowed Stephen Miller, but he was a crypto-Nazi by the time he left for college. But at the time when you see that tape, he knew it was wrong, right? You watch that tape, he's laughing. You can't say on that tape, quote, torture is a celebration of life and human dignity. You can't say that, get a laugh, which he did, and laugh without knowing that what you're saying is wrong. That's why it's funny. That's why people were laughing. Believe it or not, society let Stephen Miller down, and his parents. And this is why Donald Trump is so malignant. He corrupts and exploits desperate minds. Everyone who surrounds Donald Trump is in a constant state of panic. Their fuel is flight or fight. And Trump thrives off people in that condition because that condition is his comfort zone. That's where he lives. Now look, there is a Stephen Miller in all of us, but a civilized society tamps that side of us down so that the Stephen Miller in all of us can find its way back up and out of us through irony, satire, and art, not through government policy. But that's exactly what's going on right now with the Republican Party. A permanent state of panic is now official government policy. And it always starts with a hateful joke. Stephen Miller was just joking on that bus when he sung the praises of torture. But what starts as a joke in the wrong hands becomes official government policy. Hitler was a joke until he wasn't. Stephen Miller was a joke until he wasn't. Stephen Miller's jokes on that bus back in 2003, those jokes about torture were just a joke until they weren't. Only months after that video of Stephen Miller was shot, we learned that our own CIA was waterboarding enemy combatants down in Gitmo and shipping other enemy combatants off to dark sites for far worse than just waterboarding. Torture was a joke until it became government policy. Donald Trump was a joke until he wasn't. And Trump floats ideas, horrible ideas, first as a joke until they become government policy. Here is Donald Trump earlier this month after visiting Alligator Alcatraz.
2018, you suggested putting alligators in the Rio Grande to prevent crossings in Texas. Is this a dream come true for you, sir?
Well, I was thinking about that, I must say. It was meant more as a joke, but the more I thought of it, the more I liked it, if you want to know the truth. And they were serious. They were actually crocodiles. They were crocodiles from Africa. They are a step beyond. But no, that was really meant as a joke, but a lot of people liked it. And a lot of people think we should do it, frankly.
The Senate, it appears, is about to vote on
I
your
hear
big,
we're
beautiful
doing well,
bill.
Ron. I hear we're doing well.
I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. If you enjoyed any of this, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, subscribe to my newsletter, leave a comment. I read all your comments. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room for keeping the conversation civilized. I think I'm going to do a show tomorrow. I think that covers everything. Thank you very much.